I don't think there's such a thing as balance. And I think early on in my motherhood, working mom journey, I tried to create balance, this perfect 50-50 split. And I think realizing that that simply just does not exist was a little like kind of therapeutic.
Hello there. This is Samantha Saxby with another episode of Moms with Benefits. I am here with Joanna. Joanna, hello. How are you?
Hi, Samantha. I'm good. How are you?
I am good. So, a little bit about Joanna. Joanna is full time working right now. She is part of a two mom family where her and her wife conceived her toddler age son. Now he's 2.5 via RIVF. And her wife is actually in the military. So, Joanna here is a military spouse. And right now they live in Tennessee, previously Arizona. And she shared with me that it's pretty common that they move around every few years or so. So we are super excited to talk with Joanna on all things working moms. We got a lot of things happening for you and your family right now. So again, welcome. Very excited to chat with you. I want to start out with just a quick educational question for those that may not know, but what is RIVF and how does that differ from IVF?
Similar to IVF, our IVF stands for reciprocal IVF. So it allowed both me and my wife to contribute to the creation of our son, Hudson. We used my wife's egg, donor sperm, and the embryo from that was put into me, and I became pregnant with our son, Hudson. So like an extra step in the IVF process, I guess.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I certainly learned something new today, so I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And so let's dive into all things working mom life. So, I mean, you're 2.5 years into it with your toddler age son. What would you say excites you most about being a working mom?
Definitely the financial aspect, being able to contribute to the finances of our household is helpful, especially with inflation and increase in cost of living. Setting an example for Hudson is very important to me as well. Resilience, persistence. I'm also the product of two working parents. My mom was a working mom. And generally speaking, I really just enjoy my career. I enjoy working and I enjoy what I do.
Interesting. And so, because you have always enjoyed your career, I resonate with that too. Throughout your pregnancy journey and once your son was born, did you ever find yourself questioning whether you wanted to continue working or felt a certain pressure to continue or not continue working? Like, any thoughts when it comes to that element of it?
I mean, who hasn't thought about that at 4 o'clock in the morning when you're pumping? I don't, I, so yes, definitely I've thought that. I think definitely like in the throes of postpartum where it's just really hard and you're so sleep deprived and you're not thinking straight, definitely. And then there's periods where, we're in the process of a deployment and it's grueling and I'm tired of solo parenting. Those moments where you're just like, is this really worth it? And I always come back to, yes, it is.
And so you love that balance of your career and using some form of childcare to keep the house going while your spouse is on active duty.
Yes, it was always our plan for me to continue my career. And we had talked about, even before we went through fertility treatments, what it would look like and what childcare would look like and what we wanted for childcare. And so we had been thinking through this and planning for this prior to pregnancy, during pregnancy, and even now, because we move so often, it's something that I consistently have to plan for.
Interesting. So that's not something I feel like I've necessarily heard a lot before, is that you were thinking about what childcare would look like, what work would look like you had a plan before you were even pregnant, right? Like that's really, really planning ahead. And so do you feel like maybe in times of doubt, feel like you circle back and it's like, no, I understand that I'm doing the right things because I thought about it and I planned ahead so much. Like, does that help?
It helps to just reconfirm in my brain, like this is what I plan for. It's okay to have these moments of I'm exhausted and I want to quit right
Yeah.
now and
Yeah.
just sleep for a week.
Yeah.
So I think in those moments, circling back and just remembering like the why is helpful.
Yeah. So let's dig into the why. You said setting an example for your son.
Yeah.
I love that. That resonates massively with me, and I also was a product of a working mom as well. So talk to me about that, either inspiration from your childhood and your parents both working, and what you feel like that's instilled in you that it sounds like you want to pass along to your son.
I am my mom's only child. And so my mom and I have a very close bond, and she always worked throughout my childhood. And while there were moments where, as every kid does, wishes that their mom was home or more present or there, I look back on my childhood and I'm so grateful and happy that I had my mom as an example of someone who showed resilience and persistence and the ability to pivot in during snow days or sick days or school holidays and breaks that were longer than any PTO that we're all used to not having available. So having that example shown to me throughout my entire childhood, and even still today she continues to work, I think was pivotal in my own decision to work and also get very creative with coming up with solutions for gaps in care.
Interesting. So, not only do you feel like your working mom taught you values in life of strength, resiliency, she also taught you to tackle challenges with creativity, with optimism, it sounds like, with you can do this and you can figure it out kind of attitude.
Yes, she's the ultimate multitasker, in my opinion, like the ultimate multitasker. And seeing her do that in my childhood was pretty amazing. And so I definitely I pulled from her, and she was always moving and always thinking 10 steps ahead. And I think that that's helped me not only as a mom, but as a military spouse as well. You constantly have to be thinking 10 steps ahead, a year in advance, especially with what we're all facing with childcare wait lists.
Yeah. Yeah, the childcare, I mean, that's a massive thing we can certainly talk about as a challenge, I'm sure. So, anything else you want to share about what excites you as a working mom?
It's just the enjoyment I get from work is different than the enjoyment I get as a mom. I think they're very, very different, and the rewards are very different. And I think each of my roles as a mom and a working mom, they fuel each other in a good way.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. They fuel each other. Yeah. All right. So then let's move to some of the challenges you have as a working mom. I know I see your face right now. So what first comes to mind, because I feel like there can be a lot. So what's the first thing on your list of a challenge?
Challenge is childcare.
Yeah.
When you have children that are young and you have a lack of village, my parents do not live in the same state. We've never lived in the same state since I got married. So, I think the challenge of finding reliable, quality childcare is really difficult, especially when you're moving every 2.5, 3 years, constantly having to think about what is childcare going to look like when we are moved next, because wait lists, as we all know, are 2 to 3 years sometimes, and then finding the quality that you would like, or the setup that you're comfortable with.
Yeah, so give me in the folks listening right now some education of when you say you're moving, that's like how often are you moving, and what does that look like being as a military spouse that you are?
Looks like chaos. Honestly, we typically will get some advance notice. How much advance notice we get is always a variable. But we move every 2.5 to 3 years. And, while the military does support in our relocation, there are so many moving pieces to moving across the country that, you have to think about. Rent or buy. How do I get my cars there? How do I transport my pets? Am I flying with my child? Am I driving? What's the cost up front going to look like for us? How much will be reimbursed? Schools, childcare, where are we going to send him? What support do I have kind of in the gap between us moving and getting there? We moved from Arizona to Tennessee, and coordinating that entire PCS, permanent change of station is what it's called. It felt like an additional full-time job. So
I bet. It sounds like you're picking up kind of your whole life, for lack of a better term, and moving it. And I would imagine that that makes it a struggle to find your village of what we like to call like your mom village.
yeah.
And so is that a related struggle because you've been moving so often that it feels like you have to kind of start over?
Yes, we're consistently starting over. Sometimes if you're lucky, and we were with moving from Arizona to Tennessee, you'll have friends at your next duty station. And we were fortunate where we did have two couples that we had known previously, but they don't have children. So trying to source childcare options felt like another full-time job. We had a great setup in Arizona with childcare, and having to say goodbye to routine and consistency and that comfort that you get with having somebody caring for your child, or having your child somewhere that they're happy in, is really tough to then move them, especially at the time Hudson was 11 months old when we moved him, and that's a tough age to move.
And so you had mentioned previously that when you know that you're moving, for this example, when you moved to Tennessee from Arizona, you had to put inquiries into childcare services like months, a year ahead of time.
Unfortunately, with the move from Arizona to Tennessee, we didn't have a ton of notice that we were going to move there. So I'm trying to remember back to this. I think it was a couple of months that we were sure we were going to Tennessee. And I began going on Facebook and looking at some of the military spouse, Army wife Facebook pages that are local to where we are. And I just posted, hey, what's good childcare? Hey, what are people doing for childcare? And I just started making inquiries, and I was realizing very quickly that the quality childcare centers, daycares that we were looking at were on 2 to 3 year wait lists, and that simply was not going to work for us
Wow.
at all. And the other childcare daycares that are in the area, I just wasn't comfortable with the quality. So we made a decision to pivot and utilize a nanny agency service. It was kind of a new service to the area. I was really grateful to find it. And she worked with us to source full-time care. What I was able to do was find a place in Tennessee. My son is now at a Montessori school. He's there from about 8 in the morning till 3 p.m. And we were able to, at the time, find kind of this full-time temporary care to fill in the gap from the time we moved to the time he started, because he wasn't able to start until he was 18 months.
And so this feels like it has obvious financial implications.
Massive, massive.
Yeah, like talk to me about how you approach sorting this out just from a financial perspective.
I think I should go back a little bit. Prior to having Hudson, my wife and I had always discussed what kind of childcare we had wanted. And we were looking at only doing nanny, one-on-one nanny in our home. We had planned for this. We knew the financial implications of what that would look like. And we also knew that, the first 5 years of having a child, your cost of childcare is just going to be high. So, we made that financial decision collectively and knew what we were getting into. What I was not prepared for was agency fees. I was not prepared for the incredibly high hourly cost that would occur when we moved from Arizona to Tennessee. It's a much higher cost of living where we are. So those factors were major, major for us to kind of wrap our minds around. But we simply just made it work because we knew that this was really our only option.
And I want to pull on that a little bit. You made it work. How?
We've been married now going on 8 years next month, and we had savings lined up that we were able to pull from for that, major one-time agency fee. And my wife was also about to deploy. And with deployment, your salary is tax-free. So we were getting additional money coming in that would support that temporary full-time nanny salary that I knew I was getting into, because with that also comes payroll and needing a payroll service, and that also factors in some extra money. So we knew it was temporary too. We knew that we had a beginning, a middle, and an end with this. Mm-hmm. And once we had Hudson in Montessori, our monthly cost of childcare did drop. It's definitely not, quote unquote cheap in any way, shape, or form, but it's definitely not what it was.
So Joanna, you're really sharing a lot of the financial impact, the planning, the mental load that goes in with that planning. You are really dealing with a lot when it comes to these moves. And at the same time, I mean, you're still working full time. So how does that factor in? How are you doing that? And is your employer supportive? And this is not a question to kind of put any employers on blast or anything like that. It's just kind of getting at the heart of how does your schedule work and how are you doing this?
I've always worked for companies that are supportive of our unique situation. I'm very open and honest that I'm a military spouse, and that's kind of been a taboo thing to say at times. There has been some discrimination that happens where if you say, hey, I'm a military spouse, the company looks at you and thinks, oh, we're just going to have you for a year or 2 years or 3 years. You're a temporary employee. With the evolution of remote work, it has allowed me to not have to hide that aspect when I'm talking about my personal life. And then also it allows some understanding because you can work remotely or, I've been fortunate enough to work remotely. I worked remotely before it was kind of, a popular thing to do and what people are doing. So it has been pivotal in me being able to keep career progression. And I think when it comes to the move and the relocation that we had from Arizona to Tennessee, I could work from a Starbucks. I could work, while I had movers in my house standing at our kitchen counter. So I was able to just kind of work around the move and make it kind of work for what was happening all around me.
That's insightful. So, and I like how you put it, the evolution of remote work. That kind of phrase. I get you. It's definitely COVID has certainly obviously escalated the trend of remote work. Right now it's kind of a hybrid is a trend as well. I'm with you. I worked remote before COVID hit too, and I loved it. And I think the biggest thing that I felt was the flexibility. It sounds like you're saying that there's a lot of flexibility and that you found companies that will support that flexibility. Like that feels huge in the success of being a working mom in general. And then you have your added complexity of being a military family and moving around. Do you agree? Is that how you kind of look at it?
100%. And I think when I've interviewed at any company, in particular the one that I'm with right now, I was very open and honest about the fact that we are a military family and that comes with deployments. It comes with, massive relocations and moves. It comes with needing some flexibility at certain times of the day, but that also doesn't mean that I'm not then putting in hours at non-traditional work times. So, at 5 o'clock in the morning, I could be signing on and doing emails and then, running an errand very quickly over a lunch break so that I can stay ahead of the game if I'm solo parenting. And having that flexibility is just very key. And I think being honest with my employer has been beneficial for me. I know not everyone has that ability, has that kind of ability to be that honest with an employer, but I've been fortunate where I have been.
Yeah. And so I like the example you use of the 5 a.m. emails. It's because it's like once you move into this world of remote work and flexible hours, it's very easy to feel, I would say, overwhelmed or like you don't have a work-life balance. If like work-life balance even exists, it's like a integration almost, or I don't know. Like, what is your take on it? How do you kind of best manage being with your son and your family as well as working in those boundaries, if you want to call it boundaries?
Yeah, I think it's such a loaded question.
Yeah.
um, I don't think there's such a thing as balance. And I think early on in my motherhood working mom journey, I tried to create balance, this perfect 50-50 split. And I think realizing that that simply just does not exist was a little like kind of therapeutic. And now I just try and be my best self and be present where I am. And, if that looks like I'm giving 60% to work and 40% at home, that's okay because sometimes it's reversed. Some weeks I am lighter on the workload and heavier on being needed by my toddler and vice versa. So I think just kind of removing the fact that balance is even possible has been helpful mentally for me. And also trying to remove that guilt of not always being with my son. He's in school several hours a day. He has care outside of me. And I try to come at this as thinking it's quality versus quantity. The time that I spend with Hudson is quality. I do not have my phone with me. We do not have any distractions. It's me and him. If he's upstairs in the playroom and I'm upstairs in the playroom, I do not have a computer up there. I do not have a phone up there. I'm with him. And it's the same thing on weekends. I have that time where I'll go for a run or go to a Pure Barre class. When I'm home and I'm with him, I'm with him.
That I think is super helpful to summarize those key points because I think they're so valuable is that you're present where you are. So wherever you are, if you're with your son, you're with him. if you're at work, you're working. And so there's a sort of a discipline there that takes, and knowing that it ebbs and flows and that it's not this equal 50-50 split all the time. It ebbs and flows just like life does. We have seasons in life and seasons every week and just seasonalities to it. I also heard, you didn't say it outright, but I felt like what I heard was that you're trusting yourself in those times to understand that a 60-40 split is okay because you know that you're doing the best in both areas. And so there's just an element of trusting yourself, which I think is important. And I think a lot of moms can doubt themselves. And then I love the quality versus quantity approach. It's really powerful mindset. So thank you for sharing all those tips. I think those are really, really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And it doesn't mean that I don't feel guilt at times when I,
Yeah.
can't go to something at school or, he's outside of my office saying, mommy, mommy, mommy. There are times when it's very difficult. But I think establishing a routine and the boundary that we have between like, this is mommy's office and, we don't go into mommy's office and this is my space for working has been important. And then something I love about the Montessori education is that instead of saying that they're playing, they actually tell the children that they're working. So he'll say, I'm doing my puzzle work or my Play-Doh work. So he kind of is understanding more and more now that I am doing my work and he has his work too.
Interesting. I just saw something on social media, of course, and I could not recall it if you asked me to recall it, but it was something along the lines of tell your toddler that if you don't want them to go on a patch of grass or something like that, like the grass has a job to do and the grass is growing and that's the grass's job. And so we can't go on the grass. And, this was just an example and I don't know the context of it, but it was very interesting, this concept of teaching jobs and work to young kids. I mean, your son is 2.5 years old. And so it's interesting to hear that approach in that it's connecting the dots of you being a working mom. So that's super, super interesting. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and he will say it to me now too. He'll say, I'm working. He doesn't want to be disturbed by me. If he's doing something and he's really concentrating, he'll say, I'm working. I'm working.
Really? Oh, wow. I love that. Okay, well, let's switch topics here a little bit and circle back to the financial approach that you and your wife have. I understand you have a well-oiled machine. You described it, before we hopped on and hit record. So please share with me what you have found works for you and your wife regarding your household finances.
We try on Sundays when she is home to have a Sunday meeting. We kind of sit down and go over what our week is going to look like in terms of routine. And also, quarterly and yearly, we sit down and talk finances. We've broken it down where my wife manages the kind of investments and retirement and long-term financial goals. And then I manage our day-to-day simply because I'm more present in the home. With having somebody who deploys frequently, it just makes logical sense that I'm the one, handling mortgage payments or car payments. We also, prior to having my son, very much wanted to have our finances in order. So we worked very, very hard to have a good chunk in savings to really understand where we wanted to be with retirement and those goals. At times we've seen financial advisors, which has been helpful for checkups, but we're pretty good at this point now where we are for kind of managing our own stuff.
That's impressive. Do you feel like that's because there's a wealth of information out there where you can kind of self-educate yourself when it comes to short-term versus long-term, your goals and how the resources you have in place can help you get to those goals? Or is one of you or both of you just always been more financially savvy?
I think we just capitalize on where our strengths are. My strengths are in the day to day and, knowing where our finances are on like that weekly and monthly and, knowing we have tuition coming up or, this is our grocery budget. But, my wife is very skilled and much more savvy at long-term financial goals. I have no desire to do anything stock market wise or, retirement savings. It's just not my wheelhouse. But when it comes to breaking down what we're going to be spending in childcare or, hey, we want to take this vacation this year, how do we get there? That's kind of what I enjoy. So I think leaning into our strengths and what we enjoy has helped us meet our collective financial goals. And then also my parents were very good at educating me on finances. And I don't I don't think everyone has that. So I'm grateful to them for giving me that gift. And, my wife is the same. So I think both of us having some knowledge from parents is helpful. And then at times, especially when we were newer in our marriage, seeing a financial advisor was actually really helpful to kind of merge what we had been doing and learn, do we want this as a joint account? Should we have individual accounts? What does that look like? So seeing somebody when we were kind of like newlyweds was, not glamorous, but really helpful.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And it sounds like, you needed different resources as your relationship evolved and as your family evolved. And so that's really interesting. And I love that you're playing to your strengths. It sounds like you two are a great team and you are aware and you know your strengths and you kind of double down on those to work together and make it work. So, in regard to your finances, you really have a special eye towards the first 5 years of your son's life, knowing that childcare is going to be a massive cost until he gets into the standard school system. Is that right?
Yes, and we also just knew the educational cost for our son would be higher. We have made the decision to be one and done. Our son is it. We are not having more children. So, knowing that and understanding that we will have one child to send to college, one child to send to, school, we've made the decision to continue with private education and we understand what that costs look like. I went to private school myself, my spouse did not. And because we are moving around so frequently in the areas that we live in, we're just not 100% sure about the quality of childcare. We've made the decision to stick with private and we understand what that will amount to. However, it's still less than what I think, the 0 to 5 years old costs look like. They're just astronomical. You need such a high level of care when they're little. There's just such a high need, and there's no after school programs that you can put them in that are less than that one on one care. So, even with sending him to kindergarten, there are options for us to do aftercare, even at a private school, that would be much less than the high level of one on one care that he may have needed with a nanny when we first moved here.
Wow. Okay. So, what you're saying in your experience is that the cost of private education is cheaper than the cost of infant or toddler daycare.
Depending on what kind of toddler daycare you're choosing and also where you live and the level of care that you're investing in. When we had a one-on-one nanny, there were agency fees attached, there were hourly costs attached to that, there were the payroll attached to that. So shifting away from that, even having him at a Montessori, which is a higher cost than a daycare, is significantly less than that one-on-one nanny cost. And it would be the same thing if we opted for a private school here and continued his education in private school in the Tennessee area that we're in. It would still come out to be less than the monthly payment that we had with one-on-one nanny care with all the additional expenses of agency and payroll.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
But that's not everywhere. I mean, if you look at New York City or Chicago or the big cities, it's very different.
Yeah. No, that's super interesting. And so it seems like childcare costs, and then ultimately that will evolve into educational costs. That is a massive line item when it comes to your finances for the next 18 years or whatever it is until, your son is financially supporting himself.
Yeah, and we knew it. We knew it going in. It's something we talked about prior to me getting pregnant. During the time that I was pregnant, we talked about it, what education would look like, what those costs would look like. And we kind of had the luxury of doing that. We had to plan when we got pregnant. We had to plan for IVF and also factor in the cost of IVF. We were not ready to do it when we first got married. We weren't ready to do it the second year we were married. There's a large cost with IVF and it almost forces you to ultra plan.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. That makes sense. That totally makes sense. So, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we wrap up here, I have a quick game that I like to do
Oh
with
gosh,
our
okay.
guests. It's not hard, I promise. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say a word, and then I want to hear the first emotion that comes to your head after I say this word. So, there's 6 words here. So, the first word is kids.
Happiness,
Pregnancy.
torture,
Mental load.
exhausting,
Finances.
annoying,
Benefits or insurance?
Necessary. That's not a feeling, but
That's okay. And the future.
hopeful.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Joanna, for sharing your story. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Samantha.
Moms with Benefits is chasing financial and emotional stability for motherhood. If you've resonated with any of the stories from our moms, we'd love for you to give us a rating and quick review to help spread the word. You'll also find Moms with Benefits on Instagram at momswithbenefits.org. Keep going and keep growing, Mama.